I got a custom order for a couple of napkin rings here that I'm just getting started on as far as carving. And one thing to note is because of the curvature in both directions is both completely round and then also a curve in this direction, it prevents me from being able to use my normal method of applying the pattern that I'd print off from the computer and then use a flat iron to apply it on here. And with all the curvature, I had to do it all by hand, so took a little while there, and it's not perfect, but I'm hoping that as I carve I can kind of use the shape of the knife, the straight edge, to clean up some of these inconsistencies that you see. So working on the outside border first, get that out of the way. Got one half done, and this is all old world style, well, almost all old world style. So these outlines here on the top and bottom are just old world style chips that are carved in relief to create the squares. And so you can probably see they're quite small. As I've said some other times, for old world style I would typically use a different knife. Here I'm just using my standard chip carving style of knife here. And the reason for using this instead of my other more typical old world style knife is because of both the size of these, that they're so small I don't really need the size and style of blade that the other one is, but also just the orientation that this is being held in my hand. It's not lying flat. It's just more conducive to use this knife with this grip. And so, because there's so many of these little squares, rather than carving them out each individually, I'm kind of doing them in groups here. Each block, you can see this pattern, it's got the vertical line, so I'm doing kind of one of those blocks at a time, all of the border chips. I've never done anything like this. I've carved a couple of eggs which have kind of a similar shape, but they had very different patterns that I was carving, and they're also a bit bigger, a bit easier to handle than this. So I wasn't entirely sure when I accepted this commission how it would work, and then once I got the pattern applied and how small these chips were, still wasn't sure. So I was glad to see when I got started actually carving it that it's not too bad. Definitely takes a lot of patience for both the pattern application and the carving process, despite how small the project is. That's one thing I found fairly early on in carving, chip carving, is how long it takes to carve a project. It doesn't really matter how big the item is, how big the chips are. What matters is basically how many times you have to put the knife into the wood. So generally the number of chips, but even if you've got more complicated multi-sided chips than just the more basic 2 and 3 sided like this, it takes longer. So even though these are all really small chips, there's just kind of a basic startup cost for putting the knife in the wood. But that's part of why I'm kind of trying to be a little more efficient and economical with my carving than I would normally worry too much about. As a hobby, I'm not too concerned with how long things take. I just like carving. And so if something takes a bit longer and I, make less money on a per hour basis, that's fine. Not too concerned with that. But I think this would get very tedious if I tried carving every one of these kind of completely on its own before moving to the next one. So you might be able to see on the camera some of these angles, some of these lines don't quite meet exactly in the middle of the border as I would like, so I'm trying to correct that with the knife as I carve, not necessarily carving exactly on all of the lines if the lines are not where I want them to be. Again, that's not something I normally have to worry too much about, since my patterns are usually printed online, or I should say printed on the computer using software to create them. So it's all perfectly even and the lines are exactly right, and it's just up to me then to follow them as best I can. And usually my carving is done flat on the table, and so it's a little easier to keep my non-carving hand out of the way. This one, since I've got to hold the napkin ring as I carve it, can make it a little bit trickier. Got to be extra aware of where that hand is, where the fingers are sticking out. So, just like that, got one half of that done. A little bit of cleanup here to try to flatten out this line, make it nice and straight. And some of this I might come back in a bit later after I kind of finish the rest of the carving and see how it looks, see if any of it stands out as needing additional correction. So then I'll move on to the other side. I'll finish up that border later, but a lot of this is old world style. So there's this triangle right here is going to be removed as old world, and then also each of these four, and then that one again up there. So this has a heavy old world style theme or motif to it. I've never done old world style chips around a curved surface. The smaller ones aren't too much of a problem because they're so small. There's not a whole lot of actual curve to worry about within each one of them. But then these bigger ones actually do make a difference. And this last slice is running along the grain, and it's a little bit bigger, so I don't want to necessarily take it all at once and risk having the grain kind of run on me, so I'm going to remove a little bit of that first. And the curvature of this kind of messes with my mind a little bit in the geometry of kind of where's down, where should this angle actually go. So I think these 3 that I've done so far, the deepest point is actually not far enough off center. So I might come back in and square those up, push that point a little bit deeper down.